During a company retreat at an old, sprawling hotel nestled in the countryside, the intention was to immerse ourselves in relaxation and team building away from our daily grind. The hotel, a grand relic from the early 20th century, exuded an antique charm with its ornate furnishings, high ceilings, and long, winding hallways. Its historic allure made it feel like a step back in time, offering an escape from the modern world. The retreat had been a pleasant affair. We spent the day engaged in workshops and collaborative activities, followed by a casual dinner and a series of light-hearted team-building exercises. As evening settled, we retired to our rooms, eager to rest before another full day ahead. It was in the middle of the night when the tranquility of the hotel was shattered by the piercing blare of the fire alarms. The sound was jarring, slicing through the stillness like a razor. I jolted awake, my heart racing as the alarm's shrill tone assaulted my ears. Disoriented, I glanced around the room, trying to piece together what was happening. I quickly threw on a robe and hurried to the door, hoping to escape the cacophony and the growing sense of dread. To my shock, the door was locked tight. I grabbed the handle and twisted it furiously, but it remained immovable. Panic surged through me. I pounded on the door, my knuckles scraping against the wood. "Hello? Someone help!" I shouted, my voice strained with fear. The fire alarm's unrelenting screech seemed to drown out any response. Desperate, I turned to the window, only to find it securely fastened. The room was quickly filling with thick, acrid smoke, making it hard to breathe. The once comforting space now felt like a prison. My heart pounded as I tried to think clearly amidst the chaos. The smoke began to curl around me, making each breath more labored. Through the haze, I heard voices and footsteps outside. I pressed my ear to the door, straining to catch any sounds that might offer a clue about what was happening. Then I heard Emma's voice, muffled but unmistakable. "I'm stuck too. What's going on? Emma. I can't get out either." I shouted back, hoping my voice would reach her through the door. "The door won't open." "We need to get out," she yelled, her voice filled with panic. "There's smoke everywhere." The urgency in her voice only heightened my own fear. I glanced around the room, searching for anything that could help us escape. I grabbed the phone on the nightstand, but it was completely dead. I tried to open the window again, but it remained firmly shut. My attempts to force the door open were met with resistance. It felt as though the door was glued shut, immovable no matter how hard I pushed or pulled. The smoke was now pouring in from the edges of the door and seeping through the gaps around the window. It was growing denser by the second, swirling around me and making it nearly impossible to see. My throat felt raw from the acrid smoke, and each breath seemed to bring in more of the choking fumes. In the midst of the chaos, a faint, eerie voice emerged from the darkness. It was a whisper, almost too soft to be heard clearly, but it sent a chill down my spine. "You can't leave," the voice said, its tone cold and menacing. "What was that?" I asked, my voice trembling as I turned towards the door. Emma's response was a panicked, "I heard it too." "Who's saying that?" "I don't know," I said, struggling to keep my composure. "But we have to get out of here." The voice continued to echo in my mind, adding to the sense of impending doom. The smoke was now so thick that it felt like I was swimming through it. My vision was reduced to a few feet in front of me, and the heat was becoming unbearable. I felt a wave of dizziness and disorientation as the oppressive atmosphere closed in around me. Emma's voice grew more frantic. "We have to find a way out. There has to be another way." "I'm trying," I yelled back, my frustration mounting. "Nothing's working." The eerie voice grew louder, more insistent. "You can't leave. You're mine." The words felt like a sinister taunt, deepening our sense of entrapment. The growl that accompanied the voice seemed to vibrate through the walls, creating an ominous, pulsating rhythm. The sensation of being watched, of something malevolent lurking just beyond our reach, made the situation even more terrifying. Suddenly, the sound of heavy, deliberate footsteps echoed in the hallway. They were slow and methodical, each step deliberate and unnervingly close. My heart raced as I tried to peer through the small gaps around the door, but the smoke made it impossible to see anything clearly. "Emma, do you hear that?" I asked, trying to stay calm despite the mounting fear. "Yes," she responded, her voice shaking. "What is that?" "I don't know," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. "But it's getting closer." The footsteps and growling grew louder, the sound resonating through the walls and floor. It felt as though something, or someone, was deliberately pacing outside our door, adding to the sense of terror. The growl was deep and guttural, vibrating through the building. In a final act of desperation, I threw my weight against the door, hoping to force it open. But the door remained stubbornly locked, and the heat and smoke were becoming too much to bear. My strength was waning, and I could feel my vision dimming as the smoke overwhelmed me. Just as I was about to lose hope, the door suddenly burst open with a violent crash. Firefighters in full gear rushed into the room, their faces obscured by masks. They quickly assessed the situation, guiding us out into the hallway. The cool air was a welcome relief, and I stumbled out of the room, gasping for breath. As we were led outside, the fresh night air felt like a balm. I collapsed onto the grass, coughing and trying to clear the smoke from my lungs. The firefighters worked efficiently, bringing the fire under control and ensuring that everyone was accounted for. The hotel's facade, once a picturesque and serene setting, now stood under the scrutiny of emergency responders. The fire was soon contained, but the experience left a lasting impact. The authorities later determined that the fire was caused by an electrical fault, but they could not explain the strange voice or the malfunctioning doors. The investigation found no unusual issues with the building structure or safety systems, and the mechanical failure of the doors was attributed to a rare and unfortunate coincidence. Despite the rational explanations offered by the authorities, the experience left me deeply unsettled. The eerie voice, the relentless heat, and the sense of being hunted created a nightmarish ordeal that defied explanation. The hotel, once a place of comfort and retreat, became a stark lesson in the fragility of safety and the unknown dangers that can lurk in the most unexpected places. Now, when I'm alone at night, I sometimes hear that chilling whisper in my mind, a haunting reminder of how quickly the familiar can become terrifying. The hotel's grand and historic charm now carries with it a dark and unsettling memory, a reminder that sometimes, even in the most seemingly secure places, we are not as safe as we believe. Last Friday, I was working late at the office, immersed in the final touches of a crucial report. The office, normally bustling with activity during the day, was eerily silent at this hour. The only sounds were the rhythmic hum of the fluorescent lights and the occasional rustle of paper as I typed away. My coworker Sarah had stayed behind with me to finish some last-minute tasks, and we were both relieved to see the clock inching towards midnight. As the clock struck 12, a shrill, discordant wail erupted from the fire alarm system, piercing through the office's usual quiet. I was startled, my heart immediately racing. The alarm was blaring with a relentless urgency that set my nerves on edge. Sarah and I exchanged anxious glances. Without a word, we both leaped from our chairs and hurried towards the exit. I reached the door first, but my hand met a cold, unyielding metal. The door was jammed tight. I yanked on the handle with all my might, but it was as though the door was fused to its frame. The reality of our situation started to sink in, and I could feel the panic rising in my chest. Sarah joined me, her face etched with alarm. "I thought you knew the fire escape was out of order," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and disbelief. I was at a loss for words. I had assumed everything was in working order, as it always had been. The realization hit hard, our usual safety measures had failed us. The fire alarm continued to blare, a relentless shriek that seemed to grow louder with each passing second. The office, once bathed in the sterile glow of fluorescent lights, was now shrouded in a thickening haze of smoke. It crept in from the gaps around the door and under the windows, turning the air heavy and acrid. Every breath I took felt like inhaling a mixture of burnt plastic and toxic fumes. Desperately, I fumbled for my phone, only to discover it was completely dead. A wave of panic swept over me. Without a working phone, we were isolated. I glanced at Sarah, who was now coughing and gasping for breath as the smoke grew denser. The oppressive heat made it feel like we were suffocating, the walls closing in with every passing moment. We tried shouting for help, our voices growing hoarse and strained as they were swallowed by the thick smoke. I pounded on the windows, but they were sealed shut, offering no means of escape. The fire alarm's wail was now almost unbearable, a continuous scream that seemed to resonate through my very bones. That's when I began to hear it, a faint, eerie whisper that seemed to come from all directions. It was a soft murmur that made my skin crawl, barely audible over the blaring alarm but distinct enough to be unsettling. I looked at Sarah, my eyes wide with dread. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. Sarah nodded, her face pale and her eyes wide with fear. She clutched at her chest as if trying to hold back a sob. The whispers continued, growing more distinct but remaining unintelligible. It was as if the building itself was speaking in a language we couldn't understand, a haunting echo that made the situation feel even more surreal. As the smoke reached our knees, the temperature in the room seemed to rise sharply. My vision was clouded, and I could barely make out Sarah's figure through the growing haze. The whispers grew louder, and I could swear I heard them forming fragmented, ghostly phrases that sent chills down my spine. Suddenly, there was a loud crash from the hallway, startling both of us. The whispers stopped abruptly, replaced by a deep, resonant growl that seemed to emanate from the very walls. It was a low, guttural sound that made my blood run cold. We both froze, our breaths coming in short, terrified gasps. The growl grew louder and closer, as though something, or someone, was making its way towards us through the smoke. Sarah grabbed my arm tightly, her grip almost painful. "What is that?" she asked, her voice trembling with sheer terror. I had no answer. All I could do was hold her hand and try to stay calm, even as panic threatened to overwhelm me. The growling noise continued, vibrating through the floor and walls, and the sense of something sinister approaching became almost unbearable. Then, as abruptly as it had started, the growling ceased, replaced by an oppressive, almost tangible silence. The fire alarm screeching had stopped, leaving an eerie quiet that was even more unsettling than the noise had been. The smoke was now so thick that I could barely see anything more than a few feet in front of me. I tried to find another way out, but it was as if the building had turned into a labyrinth of darkness and despair. Just when I thought our situation couldn't get any worse, the door we had been struggling with suddenly burst open. The rush of cool, fresh air was a stark contrast to the heat and smoke we had been enduring. We stumbled into the hallway, disoriented and gasping for breath. Firefighters in full gear rushed past us, their faces obscured by masks. They guided us out of the building with a practiced urgency, but the experience was so surreal that I could barely process what was happening. Outside, the night air felt like a bomb, and I collapsed onto the grass, breathing deeply and trying to steady my racing heart. As I looked back at the office building, I saw that the fire was now under control. The once ominous structure now looked almost serene in the aftermath, but the horrors we had experienced inside remained fresh in my mind. The building was inspected thoroughly, and no structural issues were found. No one could explain the strange noises or the malfunctioning doors. It was as if the entire event had been a cruel twist of fate with no rational explanation. The fire was deemed accidental, and the building's safety systems were reviewed and updated. But the experience left a deep mark on me. Sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I still hear those faint whispers and that ominous growl. I can't shake the feeling that something dark and unseen was lurking with us that night, something that defied explanation and left an indelible scar on my sense of safety. The memory of being trapped, alone with something malevolent in the dark, is something I carry with me, a constant reminder of the night when the ordinary turned into a living nightmare. I was staying at a friend's remote cabin for the weekend, eager for a break from the frenetic pace of city life. Mark, my friend and host, had invited me up to his secluded retreat, nestled deep in the woods. The cabin was a charming, rustic hideaway, perfect for escaping the noise and stress of everyday life. We arrived in the late afternoon, unpacked, and enjoyed a relaxed evening together. The serenity of the cabin and its surroundings made it feel like we had stepped into a different world. The night began comfortably. We cooked a simple dinner, laughed over old stories, and settled in for a movie. The cabin was warm and inviting, with the fire crackling in the hearth adding to the cozy atmosphere. As the evening wore on and the clock inched towards midnight, we were both looking forward to a good night's sleep. Out of nowhere, the piercing shriek of the fire alarm shattered the peace. The sound was deafening, cutting through the calm of the night and causing both of us to jump. I stared at Mark, my heart pounding. "What's that noise?" I shouted over the alarm's relentless blare. Mark, looking just as bewildered, rushed towards the door. "Let's get out of here," he yelled, trying to keep his voice steady. I followed closely behind him, but when we reached the door, our hope for a quick escape was dashed. The door was jammed, and despite our best efforts, it wouldn't budge. "This can't be happening," Mark said, his voice strained with frustration. He shoved against the door with all his strength, but it remained stubbornly locked. "It must be some kind of prank," he suggested, trying to sound hopeful. I shook my head, anxiety creeping into my voice. "I don't think so. The smoke's starting to come in from under the door. This is serious." The smoke was creeping in from the edges of the door and seeping through the windows. It quickly filled the cabin, turning the air thick and acrid. Each breath felt heavier and more difficult, and the once comforting cabin now felt like a trap. The fire alarm's screeching seemed to grow louder and more insistent, amplifying our sense of panic. I grabbed my phone to call for help, but my screen remained stubbornly blank. "My phone's dead," I said, frustration clear in my voice. Mark glanced at me, his face pale with fear. "Great. Just great," he muttered, his panic rising. "We need to find another way out." We started searching the cabin for another exit. I tried to remember if there were any other possible escape routes or windows we might have missed. Our efforts were in vain, the windows were sealed shut, and every corner of the cabin seemed to offer no escape. Then came a sound that made my blood run cold, a faint scratching noise coming from the walls. It started softly, almost as if it were a distant echo, but it grew louder and more insistent. The scratching was rhythmic and unnerving, a sound that seemed to be coming from all directions. "Mark, do you hear that?" I asked, my voice trembling. He nodded, his eyes wide with fear. "Yeah, I hear it." "What the hell is that?" The scratching grew louder, more pronounced, and it felt as if something was trying to break through the walls. Our panic escalated as we realized the noise was coming closer, as if the source was inching towards us. We could feel the vibrations through the floor and walls, adding to our growing sense of dread. Mark's attempts to force open the door became frantic. "Come on. We have to get out of here," he shouted, sweat dripping down his face. "I'm trying," I yelled back, my voice cracking with frustration. The smoke was now so thick that it was difficult to see, and the heat was becoming unbearable. Each attempt to open the door only seemed to make things worse. The scratching noise abruptly stopped, leaving us in an oppressive, suffocating silence. The fire alarm's blaring had become a cruel reminder of our helplessness. We were surrounded by an impenetrable fog of smoke, and the silence was almost worse than the noise had been. It was as though the silence itself was a tangible entity, pressing in on us. "What's happening? Why did it stop?" Mark asked, his voice a mixture of confusion and fear. "I don't know," I admitted, trying to keep my composure despite the overwhelming panic. "But we need to keep trying." Just as I began to lose hope, the door suddenly burst open with a deafening crash. We were momentarily blinded by the sudden influx of cool, fresh air. Firefighters in full gear rushed into the cabin, their faces obscured by masks. They quickly assessed the situation and guided us outside. The night air was a shock to my system, cool and refreshing after the stifling heat inside. I collapsed onto the grass, gasping for breath, trying to shake off the effects of the smoke. As we were led away from the cabin, I glanced back and saw that the fire was now under control. The once threatening structure seemed almost serene under the moonlight. The firefighters and investigators thoroughly examined the cabin. The cause of the fire was traced back to an electrical fault. However, the strange scratching noises and the malfunctioning door remained unexplained. The inspection revealed no unusual issues with the building structure or safety features, and the door's malfunction was attributed to a mechanical failure. Despite the rational explanations given by the authorities, the experience left me deeply unsettled. The scratching noises and the sense of something malevolent lurking just beyond our sight haunted me. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the night than a simple fire. It made me question everything I thought I knew about safety and the seeming security of a remote retreat. Now, when I'm alone at night, I sometimes hear faint echoes of those eerie whispers and scratching sounds in my mind. The memory of being trapped, of the fire alarm's relentless scream, and of that disquieting silence, lingers as a haunting reminder of how quickly the familiar and comforting can become a nightmarish ordeal. The cabin, once a sanctuary, became a stark lesson in the fragility of safety and the unsettling reality that sometimes, the most terrifying things are those that defy explanation.